Hi, what I'm about to explain in this video is a little bit of the way that I've been turning my own bottom-up processing as an autistic person into big picture conclusions to make sense of the world. So earlier today, I was having a bunch of realizations and I was recording them on my voice notes, just kind of stream of consciousness, and I wanted to see how this could translate into my ways of journaling. And I think the thing that I've been circling for a while now in terms of journaling is, to put it simply, just like what my indexing system would be. Like, what are the general categories for the things that I like to write about? And it even kind of like goes along with like what I was realizing and then like talking about on my voice notes, because I was realizing certain things about um, emotional experiences, emotional healing, and I was trying to categorize them. And that's what I've been trying to do in general, is understand the ways that my brain processes information and then the best ways that it likes to contain that information so that I can recall it more easily. And so I kind of did a brain dump and sent it to ChatGPT, and we kind of like worked through a couple of iterations. I was like, well, could you show me some possible ways to categorize these types of information? And then it gave me several different options, and I was like, okay, these two sound like the most helpful and the most like aligned with what I'm looking for. And then we like refined that further. And so I wanted to share with you kind of where I ended up, because it feels like a really big like thing that I've unlocked for myself, and I'm excited to start implementing that. But I also feel like the ways that I got to this conclusion are pretty cool and maybe might help other people. And this is how maybe you learn, and it might be helpful for you to hear it framed this way. So I'm basically looking to make a meaning map. I was finding that I was having a lot of different like notebooks. I was having a lot of different like modes of expression. So I would use videos, I would use voice notes, I would write things down, I would type things out, and I would be talking about a bunch of different things. And I wasn't really sure how to organize this. It often felt like I was getting a lot of just like bullet point information. Like, say I realized something about my emotional well being, and I realized that through thinking about my relationship with my co parent. So, if you were to think about ways to categorize that, that could be like emotional healing on one side, but it also could be like co parent relationship. There isn't a wrong category, but some placements move my arc along while others clutter it. So, if I were to place this certain realization in the emotional healing category, it would actually feel a little bit like clutter, because in the arc of my emotional healing, that is a little too specific to advance that storyline along. But if I were to place it in the story arc of my co parenting relationship, it's actually like a milestone, and it helps me understand that relationship more than I'd had before, and it actually allows me to move forward where it might have felt like that was a stagnated storyline. So the two kind of things that I'm going to be moving forward with, and excuse my like kind of language around this. This is like literally things that I figured out today, so it's still hard for me to kind of voice this, but a meaning map requires stable anchors, so those are the domains of life. So that's one part, and movable lenses, the narrative lens. So the same observation can change significance depending on where you set it. Your insight that there isn't a wrong category, but some placements move the arc while others clutter, is key. This means your system needs dynamic placement rules, not what category does this belong to, but where does this thought do the most work in a story. This turns categorization into narrative architecture, not filing. I got really excited. So I'm going to kind of read a little bit of what ChatGPT kind of like described here. Another view is that you may be building an ontology of relevance rather than a journaling system. In a standard journaling structure, categories store information. In your structure, categories activate information. If a thought sits idle, you consider it misfiled. If a thought accelerates an arc, the placement is correct, temporarily. And so here are some of the assumptions that are underneath this. Information is inert unless placed within a narrative arc. Arc equals the force that turns observation into insight, which feels really important to me. Categories shouldn't categorize, they should orient. You mistrust systems that freeze your identity into static topics. You prefer frameworks that act like story engines rather than storage units. So the two structural pillars, my selected frameworks are: pillar one, a narrative lens. This is your camera angle. The same observation can be viewed as a detail, a conclusion, an origin moment, a relational scene, an emotional weather pattern. You think in vantage points, not topics. Pillar two is the domain of life. These are your world regions. Examples of my world regions are self image, body, parents, co parent, friendships, physical space, creative work. They anchor thoughts in real world context without freezing them into fixed psychological categories. Together, these create lens, how I see it, with domain, where it lives. And the real engine is the arc acceleration principle. A thought is correctly placed when it moves a story arc forward, not when it is perfectly categorized. So the holding principle here is wrong placement equals clutter. And clutter, once again, to remind you, for me, feels like when there's information that I receive that I feel is significant. So it can be something where I notice and I'm like, that must mean something further here. But if I don't know how to place it, it ends up taking energy from me because I'm holding on to this idea, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. And often that causes me like frustration and confusion. So it pulls more energy from me to store this information. And so what I've been doing is honestly just letting go of information and assuming that it will come back to me when the time is right, when I know how to categorize it. And right placement in this sense means momentum. So it means that it becomes part of the flow of like what I already had figured out, like the storylines that I had already kind of determined were part of my life. So to sum up, in the end, the like bare bones starting point is I will be using the following. The number one is arc, which story thread this note advances. Number two is lens, how I'm viewing it. Like, is this a detail, a conclusion? Is this a relational scene, a somatic signal? Number three is the domain, where it lives in my world. This would have been probably my original way of indexing, is like the domain where it lived, but that didn't feel very authentic to how I process things because it felt like it was missing context and I didn't know how to include context without confusing myself or adding too much information that was unnecessary. And then the last thing is like the observation, like the actual content. So this was my big discovery for my journaling today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm excited.